Hello there! Have you ever wondered how tiny an operating system can be? Do you know what is wireless sensor network? Well, if you want to know more, let me introduce you to tiny operating systems. Firstly, what are operating systems? Well, operating system is a medium that acts as an interface between a hardware and a user. Okay, secondly, what is TinyOS? TinyOS actually stands for Tiny Operating Systems. It basically combines Tiny with operating systems. It is an open source operating system that is made with very little materials. Its very distinct feature is how tiny it is compared to many other operating systems in the market. For instance, Apple OS, Linux, and Windows OS. Thirdly, WSN. What do you think it is? It actually stands for Wireless Sensor Networks. This is a network of sensor nodes distributed in a space to detect changes and report the conclusions to a center-based station. Each sensor nodes are embedded with a tiny OS which have low power, small size, and little energy. The many tiny OS attached with the sensor nodes create a network that collects information regarding the space. Fourthly, let's move into the applications of TinyOS. There are various applications of TinyOS in different industries today. For instance, companies can monitor the climate, the temperature, the humidity of a wide area using WSN and TinyOS. Besides that, it supports Bluetooth devices, and it can be used in a microwave oven. Other than that, it is used in military activities as well as the security system in banks. TinyOS can also increase the efficiency of various monitoring. For instance, industrial monitoring, resource monitoring, environment monitoring, and solar monitoring. Okay, let's dive in deeper into TinyOS.
What's so special about TinyOS? Low resource is needed to run TinyOS. It requires a 1 MIPS processor, 512 bytes of RAM, 8 kilobytes of disk space, and 50 microvolts of energy. A 1 MIPS processor can process 1 million instructions per second. TinyOS needs only 1 MIPS processor, while to run Windows 10 smoothly, we will need 83,000 MIPS processor. And energy consumption. Laptop takes 50 watts of energy, LED light bulb takes 6 watts, and TinyOS takes only 50 microvolts. TinyOS is designed to be event-centric, which, for example, when temperature more than 26 degrees Celsius, trigger alert. It is also a platform for innovation because developers need to build their own solution. TinyOS is coded in NAS-C, which is an extension to C programming. NAS-C is optimized to reduce RAM needed to run programs. TinyOS includes components that are more focused on wireless sensors, while Windows 10 have components that are more useful for personal usage. TinyOS uses event-based design, which means no CLI, no GUI, and inputs are from sensors. TinyOS works by performing tasks when a condition is satisfied. TinyOS is fully non-blocking. The processor can work on task A for 2 milliseconds, then task B for 3 milliseconds, then back to task A in a cycle. This non-blocking implementation allows the processor to start on second task before first task is finished. For example, the device works on task A, thermometer starts measuring temperature, then task B, check if air conditioner is turned on, then back to task A, read result from thermometer. Why non-blocking? This is to maximize the CPU usage. If the CPU doesn't sleep and wait for next task, we can say that we are using the CPU efficiently.
Pros and cons on TinyOS. Pros: TinyOS is small because it is only single use, and small in size and storage needed because it is used in sensors, and sensors are usually small. Low memory is needed because TinyOS is designed to run simple programs and its code requires low storage space. TinyOS is an event-driven OS. It reacts to events in real time and it provides accurate info for IoT. Cons: it is hard to code because of restrictions like low voltage and memory, and inefficient to write a complete code. This is an example of Nesquik code which is used in coding TinyOS. TinyOS has little function because it is event-driven and it has no virtual memory and lack of pre-made functions. Multiple adjustments. Many adjustments needed to allow software and hardware to interact smoothly. Now let's move into conclusion.
TinyOS is a tiny and flexible operating system that can be implemented into small devices like sensors. TinyOS can be seen as a common application in organizations for internal or external purposes. TinyOS are used in smart homes. This helps the owner of the house to turn on the lights automatically while going into the house. TinyOS are also used for military purposes. This helps the military to know better if there are intruders in their airspace. TinyOS are now everywhere in our current society. It can be used as temperature sensors, or for resource monitoring, or even for detection of faulty crops in agriculture industry. All of these uses TinyOS. Without the use of TinyOS, most of the machines cannot work perfectly. All in all, TinyOS is able to bring various benefits to the society depending on the situation. Its nature of being tiny distinguishes itself from the other operating systems. This feature gives many solutions to companies looking for flexibility in terms of finance when it comes to budgeting. However, because of this characteristic, there are restrictions in the usage. It can be difficult for programmers to code when they are given a restriction in space. In conclusion, TinyOS has contributed in part of the growth of technology. It helped impact the community with the concept of wireless networks. TinyOS may soon be replaced by a new innovation. However, we cannot deny the influence it had on technology.